After her father's suspicious death and a will that slices her out of the family home, an estranged daughter engineers a meticulous revenge against her golden child brother, only to open a letter that proves he's been bleeding for her in silence for 15 years. The casket looked wrong in the bright church. My father never liked light this clean. He preferred the dusk that forgives, that softens edges and bad habits. The choir sang "Abide with me" as if they meant it. I mouthed the words and watched my mother's hands shake around a folded packet of papers the color of old bones. She clutched it like a relic, like it could warm her. On the second pew, my brother Caleb held himself at parade rest, handsome enough to pass for steady. He nodded to neighbors and back-patted bankers, the Harrow composure stitched tight across his face. When the usher reached me with a sealed envelope, my name pulled in my breath. Father's handwriting. The date in his careful block letters yesterday staggered me like a slap. I didn't open it there. I slid it into my coat, felt the weight of it against my ribs like a borrowed heartbeat, and remembered the last time our house had been this full. The night the dock collapsed under our teenage bravado and whispered, "Dare yous." 15 years ago, Renfield Lane smelled like wet rope and lilies, and the adults spoke in thresholds, never entirely inside a room. That was the night our family began to speak in clauses. When the service ended, Mother rose slowly, the parchment in her grip, and I understood. These weren't sentimental keepsakes. These were instruments. Wills and testaments and the last knives words can be. The Harrow house stands a little apart from the village, all old shingles and narrow windows that hold the wind the way a throat holds a secret. The brass plate beside the door, Harrow, has been polished by generations and denial. Our lawyer, Miss Vale, met us in the study beneath the watercolor of the pier. The fireplace was unlit, October cold insisting itself, and the room had that dressed look it got when outsiders were present. Mother sat at Father's desk and placed the document packet on the leather, the way a priest sets down a chalice. Caleb stood behind her. I took the chair by the window and let the wind press its palm against the glass behind my ear. Miss Vale read the will in a voice that did not tremble. Article 1. I revoke all prior wills and codicils. Article 2. I direct that my just debts, funeral expenses, and the expenses of administering my estate be paid as soon as practicable. It turned quickly to Article 4. Article 4. Disposition of real property. I devise my residence at 27 Renfield Lane to my son, Caleb Harrow, subject to a life estate held by my wife, Evelyn Harrow. Upon the termination of said life estate, fee simple absolute shall vest in said son. My daughter, Mara Harrow, shall receive the contents of the cedar chest in the attic and any personal effects therein. The cedar chest, a trunk that stank of mothballs and dusted dolls. I felt my mouth smile without my permission and watched Miss Vale's eyes flit to me and away. It gets crueler with age, I thought, how paperwork can still find the soft places in a person with surgical accuracy. Article 5, she continued, establishes a scholarship fund in the name of our late neighbor Jonah Klein. The room tilted. The residue of the estate shall pour into that fund. Jonah, the dock boy with the laugh like a gull, the one who hadn't come up when the pier gave. My lungs remembered being 16 and full of cold water. Caleb glanced at me, a flick of pupils gone quickly. Mother smoothed the page edges as if she could sand them back into something kinder. I kept my face arranged and asked the practical question, date of execution. 3 weeks ago, Ms. Vale said. There is also a no contest clause. She read, Article 8, in terrorem clause. Should any beneficiary hereunder contest this will or any of its provisions directly or indirectly, such beneficiary shall forfeit any and all interest provided herein, and shall be deemed to have predeceased me without issue. Even the reproach had father's diction. When it was done, when the signatures were a chorus of ghosts and the witnesses' addresses were footnotes on our lives, Ms. Vale closed the folder. Your father was very clear. He wanted the house eventually to be Caleb's. It was always going to be, Mother said, and for a moment her voice held the brittle satisfaction of prophecy fulfilled. We drank tea afterward, the way families entertain shock. Caleb made my cup without asking how I take it, still too much honey, and handed it to me with a practiced grin. Good to have you back, he said, like the last 15 years were a casual silence we'd both agreed to. I ran my thumb over the envelope in my pocket, feeling the sharpness of the flap. The letter warmed under my skin. and I thought of knives again. I opened it alone in the attic under the slope of the roof. The cedar chest sat in the corner, banded and stubborn. Dust floated in the ladder of window light like suspended silt. Father's letter smelled like the study. Ink. Tobacco from the pipe he didn't smoke in front of Mother. Paper left near a sun-warmed sill. Mara. Thousand years. I'm writing quickly, which is not my custom. There are things I let stand too long. I'm not asking forgiveness. I ask only that you read. The house is a covenant. I made a covenant with the wrong child. That is my failure. There are reasons you left. There are reasons I let you. I thought distance would cauterize what we could not say. I was wrong. There is a truth about that night at the pier. If I don't find the courage to speak it while you can look at me, then let this be the place you first see it. Jonah's death sits in our home like a chair we all pretend is not there. He died because the line was scored, the ink pooled. The next line began new. I cannot put this part on paper and live in this house another hour. Meet me after the service. I'll be in the study at 5. We will speak and then we will stop pretending this is love. My watch read 4:32. Downstairs, the front door opened and closed. Voices swelled, neighbors, roast dishes. The machinery of condolence. I watched dust and the minute hand and the memory of a boy's hand slipping from mine under black water. I folded the letter. 5 o'clock. By the time the wall clock reached 5, the study was full of people and little clean plates. The house did what it did best, make public rooms of private grief. I threaded through bodies and offered nods. Where the letter had asked for a narrow silence, the house had summoned a crowd. Caleb was in Father's chair, laughing at a story the bank manager told, the kind of laugh you do with your shoulders. He looked so much like Father in that chair that rage rose in me like bile. The letter burned in my pocket, a promise the house had broken. I found Ms. Vale at the liquor tray. Did he say anything about meeting today? I asked. She measured bourbon. He didn't, I'm sorry. Mother touched my elbow. There are people you should say hello to, she said, which has always meant behave. I behaved until the yard emptied of cars and the sun was a bruise along the hedges. 5 came and went under the weight of casseroles. No one came to meet me in the study. Father had left a letter to say he would speak, and then didn't speak. I felt 16 again, mouth full of words the house had no rooms for. In the quiet, I did what I had not done in a decade. I walked to Father's mahogany desk and tried a drawer. Locked. The second drawer slid. Inside, a pharmacist's printout. Midazolam, recent refill, Father's name, Caleb's signature. The date was 2 days before he fell. Another paper. A ledger column with numbers that were nearly neat, the way a liar writes when he wants the accountant to trust him. 3 cash withdrawals, 5-figure in the month before. I kept my face from changing. The house had more knives than I could carry. My phone vibrated on the desk. A voicemail, time-stamped, 02:14 a.m. The morning Father died. Unknown number. I pressed play. Voicemail, 02:14 a.m. Unknown mail. Mr. Harrow, you promised... Static. Not tonight. We've done enough. Background. Glass clinks. A door, a rushed breath. Another voice, faint. So I come, Caleb, please. Call ends. The room went thin. Something is destroyed forever, a voice in me said, and I didn't yet know what. The scholarship fund in Jonah's name ran electric through the village. The Kleins had moved away, but you couldn't say Jonah's name without the pier bending under it. We were 16. The summer people were gone. Caleb had dared Jonah to jump from the outer pylon. I had said no. I had said it, I keep saying it. And Jonah had laughed and said, keep the boat steady, Mara. Then he'd climbed the rail and gone over like a coin. It wasn't a great height. Boys did it every August. He didn't surface. We learned later the water there was deeper than we thought. The pilings bowed, the silt hungry. By the time the divers came, it had become a vigil. Father called the sheriff. Mother made coffee for men with halogen eyes. Caleb stood beside me, and for hours we held the same shape of silence. After, there were statements and paper cups, and an unthreatening man saying, we'll need a record of who said what first. I said the words I could say. Caleb said more. He said he dared. He said he'd jumped there before. He said he should have stopped Jonah. The adults nodded to themselves, as if we'd given them what they needed to file it properly under Tragedy Summer Boys. Father took Caleb's shoulder in a grip too hard and too proud, And when we got home, Mother said to me, "Let him have his punishment. It's what men carry." And she sent me away to an aunt in Hartford until school settled. I stayed away when it did. Now Father had endowed a fund for Jonah and given the house to the son who dared him, and left me the cedar chest like a consolation prize. If he wanted confession, he'd picked a bad time to die. Revenge, when it is properly arranged, feels like administration. It looks like a checklist in an email subject line. It sounds like a printer. It began with a simple, grown-up decision to request records. The pharmacist faxed a refill history that matched the printout I'd found. Midazolam is a sedative, a benzodiazepine you administer before procedures. Father was not going in for a procedure. His chart, I requested that too. There are HIPAA-circling ways, listed anxiety and insomnia. The signature accepting the refill was Caleb's. I could hear his voice on the voicemail. "Not tonight. We've done enough." Ms. Vale called to confirm there would be a brief meeting the next morning regarding asset transfers. "We don't need to discuss the will again," she said, professional to the point of unkind. "It is what it is." "I'd like to review the no contest clause," I said, as if that hadn't been the only sentence I'd memorized. "There is very little to review," she said. "Your father wrote iron," I printed more. "Bank withdrawals. Security log entries. The night Father died, the alarm recorded the side door opening at 12:41 a.m. and again at 2:19. The camera by the hedge had been offline. Maintenance, the log claimed. When I checked the service invoice, the technician's signature was Caleb's. Brother, son, heir, and apparently a part-time maintenance man. It is sometimes a solace to hate someone. It organizes the air. It gives you architecture when grief is a fog. The house sharpened into a theater where I would direct the final act. I wrote a letter to the DA's office that used a formal voice and attached polite proofs. I asked nothing, and the asking was loud. I saved the clincher for the confrontation I had always been owed. In the cedar chest lay a quilt, a moth-eaten shawl, a ragged bunny that was never mine, and a photo album wrapped in tissue. The first page held a picture of the pier, faded sky and 3 smears of teenagers. The caption in Father's hand, Renfield Pier, Summer 2009, for the one who kept the boat steady. I sat on the attic floor and felt my life tilt and tilt, unmoored by a sentence that could be gratitude or accusation, or both. I looked 16 again, chin fierce, hair in a braid I never wore well, left hand on the gunwale of the skiff. Who had kept the boat steady? Was it praise? Beside the album, a manila envelope. Inside, a single typed page, another clause from the will. This one unsigned and undated, a draft annotated in Father's hand. Article 4B, draft. The residence at 27 Renfield Lane is a burden and a symbol. It shall be held in trust for 10 years and, if within that time my children reconcile, to be evidenced by a written instrument, it shall pass to them jointly. If they do not, it shall be sold and the proceeds added to the Jonah Klein Fund. In the margin, in pencil, cowardice? Mercy? I held the page between my fingers and watched the word mercy blur. At midnight, I walked the gravel to the hedge where the camera had blinked into darkness. Renfield Lane wore the moon like a bruise. The grass remembered the shape of our childhood games. The house breathed behind me with its old wooden lungs. I dialed the unknown number from the voicemail. It rang, then a man answered in a voice I recognized not by sound but by the way it made my back straighten. "Mr. Klein?" I said and tasted rust. "This is Mara Harrow." Silence. Then, "Mara, well, I suppose we're overdue." He was Jonah's father. He had not moved away as cleanly as the neighbors had said. He still had a P.O. box in town. He still had a voice that made my throat smaller. "I heard your message to my father," I said. "That message wasn't for you." "Nothing has ever been for me," I said, and then hated the brat in my mouth. I leveled my voice. "Did my brother pay you to keep the scholarship quiet? Is that what you promised means? You think a fund for my son is payment?" He said, fury waking. "It's a tithe. It's late. What did he promise?" He swallowed. One of those pauses you hear. And I understood he was deciding what kind of man he would be tonight. "He promised to tell you," Mr. Klein said, before he told anyone else. "Tell me what?" "That none of you pushed Jonah. That he jumped because he was trying to show your father he wasn't the only boy who could be brave. That your father had dared Caleb his whole life. That Caleb tried to keep him from it and couldn't. That Daniel, your father, Came to my house the next day with a check and a look on his face like something just got born wrong. He promised me he'd make it right. He said he'd fix the way he'd made your brother carry everything. The wind lifted the hedge. I put a palm flat against my stomach to make sure it was still there. Your father called me last week, Mr. Klein said, softer. Said he'd add the house proceeds to the fund if you and your brother didn't reconcile in a year. I told him that wasn't the bargain I wanted. I wanted him to tell the truth. He said he was going to. Said he'd meet you after the service. He didn't. I said maybe he didn't get the chance. I thought of midazolam and cameras and doors opening at 2:19 and my own. Letter to the DA waiting like a match morning made the house smaller. Ms. Vale's briefcase clicked open at 10 and the crystal bowl on the desk threw little rainbows on the inkwell. Mother sat with her hands folded, as if prayer could be a posture even now. She had painted her mouth the color of composure. Caleb came in late without apology, looking like the kind of man portraits flatter. He took the chair beside Mother, nodded at me and set his phone face down on the desk. We'll keep this brief, Ms. Vale said. There are transfer forms. There is also a question regarding a draft clause Mr. Harrow considered, but did not execute. She slid the unexecuted Article 4B onto the desk. Caleb read it, jaw ticking. Mother didn't touch it. When their eyes were on the paper, I placed my page on top of it. The pharmacist's refill. Big black ink that didn't tremble. Midazolam, I said. Sedative. A signature here. Your signature, Caleb. Mother looked at me like I'd sworn. Caleb didn't blink. Dad couldn't sleep. And the security log? The camera offline. The door at 2:19. The voicemail at 2:14. I kept my voice in the register of a clerk. What were you promising, Caleb? He let the silence work. When he spoke, his voice was even. I promised Mr. Klein I'd make sure the fund was set up before anyone contested the will. You were with Father that night, I said. He looked at me then, and it was a look I had not earned and did not recognize. Pity. Yes, he called. He was anxious. He asked me to sit with him. He said he'd tell you everything in the morning. He asked for something to help him sleep. Did you give it to him? The doctor prescribed it. I signed for the refill. I crushed a small dose into his tea. He slept, and then fell down the stairs. He flinched. I put him to bed. He woke at 2. He said he needed air. I walked him as far as the landing. He told me to leave him a minute. He wanted to walk his own house. Caleb's hand shook for the first time. I shouldn't have left him. Mother made a sound like a plate cracking. Why take the camera offline? I asked. Because I'm not interested in letting the village watch Dad wander in his robe at night and make a Greek chorus of it, he snapped, and then pointed at the clause. Because he wanted dignity. Because he asked. I slid my last page across the desk like a dealer who likes her hand. The voicemail transcript typed for clarity. I read the line in the other voice myself. Caleb, please. He closed his eyes. That was Dad. Begging you. Begging me not to drag you into this, he said. And now we were in the theater where voices get low and honest. He was going to tell you about Jonah and about the money. The withdrawals were to pay off a man who had a photo of you on the pier that night, looking the wrong way. He was going to sell the narrative that you dared Jonah. Dad was trying to buy back the story. It was a mess. He was a man who'd put 15 years of silence between what he felt and what he did. He was trying to close the gap in a week. I could feel Ms. Vale hold her breath. Mother sat very straight, like posture might be the only border left between us and falling. You've always been good at explaining, I said. It came out cruel and small. He looked at me and something in his face gave up being careful. Do you want me to say it, Mara? Do you want me to say that I've been lying since I was 16 so you could stay soft? That I told the Kleins it was my dare, not yours, because you had a scholarship and I had a father's pride to work with? That every time Dad pressed me to be better, I accepted it because it meant you didn't have to answer the phone when Jonah's name rang? That I signed for sedatives because he couldn't lie still with what he'd done to us? What he'd done to us? I asked, but what I meant was what I'd done. Caleb turned the photo album so it faced me, found the caption with his thumb, for the one who kept the boat steady. He looked at me hard. He meant you, Mara. You kept it steady. You told him not to dare Jonah. You were the only one who ever told him no. He was going to tell you he knew that. He was going to tell you the house was a burden, not a prize, and he'd put it in my hands because he thought I was built to carry weight. He was wrong, but I kept carrying. I was already reaching into my bag when he finished. The DA packet sat there like a bomb I had already mailed. I sent it last night, I said. Mother's hand went to her throat. What did you do? I sent the logs and the refill and the voicemail, I said. I said I believed Caleb had, the word wouldn't fit, had hastened things. Caleb inhaled once a quiet acceptance. He folded his hands like a man at an altar. So of course you did. Then call them, Mother said, fast, urgent, alive for the first time in days. Call and take it back. For God's sake, I was already dialing. The assistant said the investigator would return my call. She did later, while we were all sitting in the study with too much air between us. I wanted to withdraw my statement, I said. Which part? The investigator asked, cool as glass. All of it, I said, and hated how childish that sounded. Evidence has already been processed, she said. We have a timeline to present to the medical examiner. If new information develops, Ms. Harrow, you can add it. What I heard, you cannot unsay what you've said. You cannot unring a bell you had your hand around for years and suddenly let go. When I hung up, Caleb was very still. It's all right, he said, to me, to Mother, to the house. If they ask me questions, I'll answer them. You'll tell them you didn't, Mother began. I'll tell them I did what I thought made sense, he said. Like always. Only after Miss Vale left, after Mother went upstairs to lie down with a hand on her eyes the way women do in paintings, did I remember the letter. Father's last failure at courage folded in my pocket. I placed it on the desk and slid it toward Caleb. He read, jaw working at the unfinished sentence. He turned it over as if the rest might be on the back. He closed his eyes a long time. You should have had this yesterday, I said. Maybe he never meant to give it, Caleb said. Maybe he meant to keep pretending right to the edge and fell. He asked me to meet him at 5. Caleb put a finger on the scrawl under Article 4B. A cowardice? Mercy? He tapped the question mark. He wanted us to reconcile to earn the house, he said. To make it ours together. I don't think he wanted me to own it. He wanted to be able to die believing he hadn't broken his children. He did, I said. He broke us. People break, Caleb said. He just did it with better diction. That night I slept in my old room with the wallpaper pattern I'd memorized as a child. The house creaked like a ship. At 3 a.m. I dreamed the pier, the thrill before the dare, the soft slap of water against wood. I woke to silence so careful it felt posed. They came 2 days later, the investigator in a dark suit and a younger man with a legal pad. They asked gentle questions with hard edges. They took copies of the refill, the log, the voicemail. They asked if Father had been depressed, if he'd ever expressed thoughts of self-harm, if he'd felt overwhelming guilt. The questions made a shape, and inside it was a man who had slipped down a staircase, not because his son had softened his edges, but because, for once, he wanted to feel each one. When they left, the house felt embarrassed. I'm going to the pier, I told Caleb. I'll come, he said. We stood at the end of the planking and looked into the black-green water. The pylons wore barnacles like a history no one wanted to scrub. I didn't dare him, he said after a long time, as if we were talking to the water instead of each other. Not that night. I did the week before. I'd been doing it all summer because you'd been telling him to stop. He listened to me more. I told him too, I said. He listened to you in a way that made him stubborn, Caleb said, and the cruelty in it was honest. You were the one person he wanted to impress by not doing what he told him to. He wanted to be the man who kept the boat steady, and he didn't know how. We walked back in the thin light. The house looked older, as if the paint remembered its first coat. On the kitchen table, Mother had set out the good plates. We'll have Mr. Klein for supper, she said. It's time to ask forgiveness properly. You can't fix this with supper, I said, and immediately felt smaller for it. I can fix what belongs to me, she said. Which is the way our name lives in this village. Your father let it rot. I won't. Caleb watched her the way you watch a person find something to lift when they can't bear the weight they're holding. It rains the day the medical examiner rules. Accident, with sedative contributing. The headline in the village paper says what headlines say, which is the only thing they can, and it's still wrong. They print the scholarship fund details. They print father's charitable grants. They print Caleb's handsome headshot beside a paragraph that makes him sound like a clean successor to a decent man. Mr. Klein comes for supper. He brings a pie. He grips my hand at the door as if he's afraid I'll vanish if he doesn't measure me exactly. At the table, Mother speaks the sentences she's been stitching since the day Jonah didn't come up. "We failed you," she says. "We failed our son. We failed our daughter." Her voice is steady, then not. She lifts her napkin and lets it fall and lifts it again like it might cover the parts that want to show. Mr. Klein nods. "It's hard to forgive the weather," he says. "It's the kindest sentence I've ever heard. After we stand at the sink, stacking plates like a ritual." Caleb leans in the doorway, the way men who don't know what to do with their hands lean. "We can change the trust," he says. "Article 4B wasn't executed, but we can make our own Article 4B. We can sell the house after Mother, after the life estate, and give the proceeds to the fund. Or we can reconcile before you inherit it," I say. "I don't know what that looks like," he says. "Me neither," I say. "It should be the beginning of a gentle story where we learn to." Instead, the doorbell rings and the house shows us what it can still take. 2 officers on the step, hats in hands. Their presence drains the kitchen of color. Mr. Harrow once says to Caleb, voice careful, "We need to bring you in for some additional questions." "It's procedural. What changed?" I ask, too fast. The officer glances down. "An email to the editor of the village paper, anonymous, alleges the sedative dose was lethal and intentional. It includes a copy of the pharmacist's printout and the security log." "Everyone has those," I say. "They were given to the DA. The email came from a public library terminal 2 towns over," he says. "We have to follow up." Caleb straightens. He doesn't argue. He doesn't look at me or Mother. He simply reaches for his coat and speaks over his shoulder with the same practiced calm. He's used his whole life to make things easier for everyone else. "It's all right. I'll answer their questions." And as he steps onto the porch, he turns back just once. His eyes find mine like he's been walking toward them for 15 years. "If they ask why I signed," he says, "I'll tell them it was to keep you from ever hearing your name said in the same breath as Jonah's again. That was the promise. So I'll keep it." The door closes. Mother steadies herself on the back of a chair as if the room pitched. The plates are still wet in my hands. I know who sent the email. Of course I do. The cadence is mine. The attachment order is mine. I sent it in the mean hours after the investigators' call, when panic is a kind of prayer. A second bell rung because the first hadn't been answered fast enough. A teacher used to tell me, "You don't fix a wrong hypothesis by piling on more data. You change the premise." I added data. I did not change. I go to the study and pull the unexecuted clause from the folder. Cowardice? Mercy? I take a pen and write beneath it, like a child underlining a lesson. Cost. They release him. Of course they do. Accidents that look like accidents have a way of staying what they are. But the investigation's shadow does what shadows do. It makes everything look like itself. The bank asks quiet questions. The village whispers louder ones. A potential client withdraws a contract. The house becomes a place where Caleb moves like someone who no longer remembers the height of thresholds. He doesn't blame me out loud. He doesn't have to. The new quiet between us has the density of stone. I keep trying to give him the letter like medicine. He keeps placing it back in my hand like a relic. "It doesn't change the fact that you didn't give it to me when it would have," he says once, not unkindly. It is the worst thing anyone has ever said to me. We sit sometimes in the study, side by side like children in the pews, and do the arithmetic of harm. If Father had met me at 5, if the clause had been executed, if I had dialed Mr. Klein's number before the DA's, if Caleb had left the camera on, if we had spoken of Jonah once out loud in a room with light. Mother begins to visit the scholarship office every Wednesday afternoon. She takes a thermos of tea and a stack of index cards with the names of applicants she wants to remember. She tells them about Jonah, the long arms, the way he skipped stones like he was playing an instrument. She says the word wrong son in a way that includes and does not include anyone. The house settles into winter with a groan. On a Sunday in February, I take a hammer to the cedar chest, not because I need what's inside, but because some things should not be asked to hold this much longer. The wood gives with a sigh that sounds like somebody finally letting go. I lift the quilt, the bunny, the albums, the paper crumbs of old letters. At the bottom, a small key taped under the lip. I laugh, a sound with no humor in it. I take it to Father's desk and fit it to the locked drawer. It opens on the first polite try. Inside, a second letter, sealed and addressed to Caleb. My hands shake. I carry it upstairs and sit on the edge of Caleb's bed, the letter on my knees. The room smells like the cologne Father wore in the 90s, and the coffee Caleb starts too early. He comes in from a run, sweat on his collar, and stops in the doorway, breath caught between us. "This was in the desk," I say. He doesn't reach for it. "You read it?" "No." He nods, slow, and sits beside me. He breaks the seal and reads. His jaw tightens, his eyes go blank. He folds the letter and opens it again as if the words might change their minds if he flips them. He hands it to me. "Caleb, thus you are the child I chose to make strong because I was afraid of what softness in a boy would cost. I did not understand what strength is. I made you into a thing that holds. You held your sister's guilt. You held my pride. You held your mother's fear. I mistook your silence for capacity. It was sacrifice. I came to you the night Jonah did not come up and asked you to let the town think you had dared him. You said yes because you thought you were made to. I did not correct the town. I did not correct your mother. I did not correct Mara. This is the shape of my sin, and I'm going to tell her now. I am going to say I am sorry, and I am going to sell this house to pay for Ewes, something that cannot be paid for, and you are going to hate me for it, and that will be your first true act of freedom. If I do not tell her, if I fail again, take this letter to her and let it hit where it should have years ago. I loved you by asking you to be a wall. I am sorry I did not love you by letting you be a door. Father, the room blurs. I put my head in my hands and say all the words I should have said at 16, at 21, at the service. I say, I'm sorry until it loses shape. Caleb lets me say them. When I stop, he speaks like a man who has been given new definitions and is seeing where they fit. He wrote to you too, he says. He asked you to meet him. He asked me to leave him at the landing so he could walk his house. I want to believe he fell because the stairs were old and his pride was older. I need you to let me believe that. I sent the email, I say, because at some point honesty has to stop being postponed. The second one, the one to the paper. He nods once like a man checking his watch. I know, he says. You write like you're bracing for weather. It reads in the syntax. I keep wanting to fix it, I say. You can't, he says. You can just not make a next thing worse. We sit there a while with the letter between us. The house clicks and sighs like a body settling into sleep. Spring comes to Renfield Lane like an apology, made by someone who means it this time. Mother plants peonies by the hedge and refuses help with the heavy spade. When I ask if it's wise, she says, I am older than my wisdom and it hasn't stopped me yet. She has started to laugh in a way that sounds like her mother. We do not reconcile with fanfare. We do the more humiliating work of not walking out of rooms. We attend Jonah's scholarship, luncheon and sit in the second row and listen to an 18-year-old with a quiet voice say what he will do in the world because a boy once died where the water is deeper than you think. We applaud until our palms sting. After, Mr. Klein hugs Mother for a time that is either too long or the first time anyone has held her the way she needed. The investigators close their file. The village gets bored and then distracted and then kind again. Caleb takes on smaller clients for a season. He repairs the stair rail himself, slow and deliberate, an act of grief and penance and craft. One evening in June, we unlock the poor latch to the attic and carry the photo of the pier down to the study. We hang it where the sun will hit it around 5. We sit and watch the light crawl across it, across Father's caption, across our faces made younger by distance. What do we do with the house? I ask. Article 4B, he says. Mercy? I ask. Cost, he says. Then adds, almost smiling. Maybe both. We draft papers after Mother goes to bed, our shoulders touching, our diction careful and ordinary. It feels like the first honest thing we've built together. We write, upon the termination of the life estate, the property shall be sold, and the proceeds added to the Jonah Klein Fund. We add a line Father would have hated and maybe loved. This provision may be revoked by mutual consent of Mara and Caleb if, at any point in the next 10 years, they can say out loud in a notarized room that they no longer need to prove anything to each other. We sign and tuck it away where Ms. Vale will find it and roll her eyes and file it anyway. On the longest day of the year, we bring 2 folding chairs to the pier. The water glitters like a thing that could forgive. We don't say Jonah's name like an incantation. We say it like a person. I tell Caleb a story about the time Jonah and I tried to bake a cake in a skillet because the oven was broken. He tells me one about how Jonah couldn't whistle and faked it with a sly puff that fooled no one. We laugh, but it's the kind that leaves salt in your eyelashes. Do you ever think about Dad on the landing? I ask. Every night, he says, and then looks at me with a softness I remember from long before we knew how to hold a grudge. Do you ever think about yourself at 16? Every hour, I say. We sit until the light goes. When we stand, the chairs leave small square imprints on the planks. It looks like we've put down markers. It looks like we plan to return. As we walk back up the lane, we pass the house, and it does not take anything from us. It looks like a place where some damage has been done, and some repairs will be ongoing. It looks for the first time like a house we could leave without becoming less. At the door, I turn to Caleb. I thought revenge would taste like justice, I say. It tastes like copper, he nods. Forgiveness tastes like work, he says. But you can live on it. We go inside. The brass harrow plate catches the last pink of the day and holds it, just for a moment before letting it go. You've just heard another story where silence speaks louder than screams. Hand revenge doesn't always come with blood, but with patience. If this tale struck a chord, don't let it fade into the dark. Subscribe to Silent Revenge Tales, where every secret, betrayal, and broken promise finds its voice in the end. Turn on the bell, so you never miss when the next story of vengeance unfolds. And remember, some debts are paid not in money, not in blood, but in silence. This is Silent Revenge Tales, where the quiet ones always win.